What's up, you guys? Jeff Anderson here, Florida Fishing Products. You might see us on One Fish, Two Fish, myself and my wife, Christy. We have our YouTube channel, One Fish, Two Fish, but we love Florida Fishing Products, and we're here on this YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk to y'all about how to catch speckled trout. Speckled trout, for me personally, is one of my most favorite fish to target in saltwater. So there's nothing that duplicates that thump that speckled trout have when they bite your lure. The speckled trout is a fish that's awesome to catch, great to eat, and let's get right to it. Talk to you guys everything you need to know really quickly about how to catch speckled trout. First thing we want to talk about is where y'all can locate speckled trout. In my opinion, if you can locate fish, then your odds of catching them are significantly greater as opposed to first talking about the right bait, equipment, all that stuff. As long as you're near speckled trout are opportunistic feeders. Speckled trout are in the same family as redfish, and they behave very similar to redfish. Minus a few things. They don't tail like redfish. Redfish, they'll, very popular, they'll tail and they're digging for crabs and crustaceans. Speckled trout, they don't do that. But in a lot of other ways, speckled trout are very, very similar to redfish. Again, they're in the same family as redfish. A lot of the tactics that we're going to use for speckled trout are essentially the same as redfish. So there's definitely a lot of crossover there. So as I'm talking about where to locate speckled trout, we're going to be showing you guys some footage of us out actually fishing and showing you guys real life examples of catching fish in these areas. So speckled trout, one of the most popular areas to target them is grass flats. Speckled trout love grass. Grass attracts a lot of their bait, whether that's shrimp, a lot of the smaller fish, even smaller trout. It also helps to improve the water quality. So speckled trout are motivated by water quality, water temperature, and also a little bit of salinity. That's one difference from speckled trout to redfish, is that speckled trout have a higher tolerance for lower salinity waters. Sorry if that sounds complicated, but speckled trout, they swim when it gets really cold to areas that is going to have the warmest water, even if that means a very, very low salinity area. So again, you guys, when targeting speckled trout, we're going to be looking for water quality. We're also going to be looking for where their food is, and then the other thing is water temperature. For structure, we're not necessarily looking for docks for speckled trout. They will adhere to physical structure like docks and laydowns and things of that nature. But speckled trout also are so speckled trout, we're mainly going to be looking for those grass flats. We're going to be looking for oyster beds. We're going to be looking for drop-offs, flats, depth changes, creek mouths. We're also going to be looking at current breaks and areas where speckled trout can ambush their prey. So similar to flounder, and again, similar to redfish fishing. So in Florida, like the Crystal River, for instance, where you have a lot of oyster reef and you have a lot of hard bottom, it's an amazing fishery for speckled trout. And one of the things that you're gonna really wanna pay attention to is where the current is. You're really going to be wanting to pay attention to how those oyster bars affect the water and the current, the depth, and all that. So what I'm going to be looking for is, again, creek mouths. I'm going to be looking for changes in depth and changes in the flow of the water. So if I have current that's ripping across an oyster bed, and then I have slack current on the other side of that, and I've got almost like a tide line, that's going to be an area that you're definitely going to want to target those speckled trout. And again, the beauty of speckled trout as a bycatch, for instance, if you're fishing in Florida, you're going to be catching snook and redfish along with it, and flounder. So when targeting speckled trout, the areas that you're going to want to look for are going to be number one, grass flats, submerged grass, and also just grass that you can see that grows above the water. Again, speckled trout, they love the grass because it does improve the water quality, the water clarity. One of the things here in the Mid-Atlantic that's really popular, especially in the Outer Banks, is catching trout off the beach in the surf, and that is a blast. However, what's highly contingent upon the bite for speckled trout fishing off the beach is the water quality. So if we get like a west wind and it creates this upwelling with muddy water and stained water and all that, speckled trout are either A, they're not really going to be there, and B, they're not going to be biting. So if the water temperature is right and the water quality is right, then those fish are going to be there. And for catching fish off the beach, we're going to be looking for those troughs, those depth changes where when, let's say you're going swimming in the ocean and it just drops off to like chest deep, like right when you walk into the ocean. That's a prime spot for speckled trout where they can ambush their bait. Again, always going back to redfish and even flounder, speckled trout are opportunistic feeders. So they're going to be looking for areas that they can ambush their bait. What's really important to know is the depth and then the water quality as well as the temperature. Temperature is very, very important for speckled trout fishing. Let's just talk about the general behaviors of speckled trout throughout the seasons. And this is very, very general information that's from Virginia, Florida, Louisiana, across to Texas. Speckled trout like water temperatures that aren't too hot and aren't too cold. They like water temperatures in that 65 to 72, 74 degree temperature. Some of our most active fishing for speckled trout in the Mid-Atlantic, Outer Banks, Virginia Beach is when that water does drop into the 50s, right before the trout know that it's about to get really cold. That's where the speckled trout are going to be very active. Right now, the time we're filming this video, it's in December, and this is some of our best speckled trout fishing across the Mid-Atlantic. And I know in Texas, you guys are catching giant speckled trout right now. So even though speckled trout love that 64 to 72 degree water temperature, they're still going to be turned on with that 50 degree, even as low as into the mid 40s. All right, you guys, so let's talk about speckled trout and how they move and behave throughout the different times of the year. And you guys, again, this is going to be very, very generalized, like kind of information, because we're talking about from Virginia to Florida across to Texas. In Texas, you know, some of y'all's best speckled trout fishing is in the winter time when the trout are turned on by that, you know, 60 degree water temperature. Same thing with Florida. In Tampa, again, Crystal River, across, you know, the Indian River in Stewart, Sebastian, Mosquito Lagoon area. Wintertime is excellent time to catch giant speckled trout in the winter because the water temp is where it's comfortable for the speckled trout. In the southern fisheries, we're going to be targeting these speckled trout. They're going to be very active, so they're going to be adhering to the oyster bars. They're going to be adhering to the grass flats, mangroves, and areas that they can ambush their bait. They'll also be around those depth changes. If there's a flat that has, let's say, oyster bars up on a flat, and then you have a drop off and some creek mouths, there's gonna be speckled trout around there, I can guarantee you. So those are gonna be some of the things that we're gonna be looking for speckled trout in the wintertime. Up here in, say, above your southern fisheries in the South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia areas, those speckled trout, as that water gets really cold in the wintertime, they're gonna be pushing back into the creeks almost as far as possible, where on a sunny day that water is going to warm up a few degrees, and that's when you guys want to go and target your speckled trout in the wintertime up here in, you know, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. Even down in the Georgia and Florida area, it's going to be that same pattern as well. But our trout up here in the Virginia, North Carolina area, they're going to push back in creeks. Some of the more popular areas to target speckled trout are going to be off the beach. You're going to be looking for troughs. You're going to be looking for that depth change. Whether it's low tide or high tide, as long as you can target an area that has a deeper drop off, a slough as we call it, or, you know, again, where it's got that sandbar that, you know, where the waves crash right up on the shore and it drops off, you know, right off the beach. Those are going to be areas that y'all want to target in the surf. So in the Outer Banks, we're going to be looking at areas like near piers, you know, where you're going to have a lot of those troughs. And then some of the other more popular areas in the surf and in our intercoastal waterways are jetties. Speckled trout love jetties. So if y'all have a jetty around you, I know y'all in Texas, y'all have all those amazing jetties and y'all catch giant speckled trout off of those jetties. Jetties are amazing areas that y'all want to look for targeting speckled trout. Across the coast to Florida, you know, you've got your mangroves, you have tons of grass flats out there. So one of the other things for speckled trout that makes them unique is they are a schooling fish, especially when they're small. When they're up to about 17 inches, speckled trout will school up in large numbers. And this is a survival tactic. They will school up to, because bluefish will eat speckled trout, you know, redfish, dolphins, of course. So speckled trout will school up in, it's pretty funny, in the same general size of that class of speckled trout. So for instance, speckled trout between, let's say, 12 to 17 inches will be in a school, but you're not gonna see a speckled trout in that school. It's very rare that you'll see a speckled trout in that school. It's gonna be that 25 to 30 inch trout, because that 30 inch trout is actually eating those 12 inch trout. Trout love large bait. That's, again, their survival tactic is growth. So trout, again, are very opportunistic feeders. So a moving tide is going to be very important. When you're fishing jetties, a lot of times, you know, you're gonna be looking for that moving tide, whether it's incoming or outgoing tide. So we're gonna go over the top baits that we like to use, but on a jetty, you know, you're gonna be bouncing a jig, you might be floating a shrimp, or, you know, floating a smaller minnow or a gudgeon, or even a smaller mullet or croaker for a speckled trout. So a moving tide is key for speckled trout. You can still catch trout on a slack tide, but they do prefer that moving tide because of that water quality. When you're targeting speckled trout, whether you're on land, you're on foot, or you're on a boat, it's a fish that you have to search them out, just like any other fish, but speckled trout more than any other inshore fish. You have to put in your time really searching them out and finding that school, because it'll change from a day-to-day basis. Speckled trout, you might catch them in this one grass flat one day, and then the next day they're just not there. So what you want to do is you want to take note of where you caught that speckled trout, what was the water depth, and what were all the features of that area where you caught that speckled trout, and duplicate that same fishery, that same area where you're catching speckled trout. Because speckled trout, like any fish, they don't have a home address. They move. Speckled trout will move sometimes a mile to a few miles in a day. You do want to keep in mind just looking for where's the biomass, where's the bait. If you pull into one creek and you see a bunch of schools of mullet, schools of shad, any bait, any form of life or activity, that's going to be a creek that you really want to spend a lot of time in, as opposed to if you go down to the next creek and you don't see as much signs of life. You're not seeing as much birds. You're not seeing as much bait. Those are some of the things that you want to weigh out when you're targeting these speckled trout. Just to summarize where to locate speckled trout, you're going to be looking for grass flats. You're going to be looking for oyster bars. Jetties are great. Depth changes are great. Changes in current, where you have a fast moving current, and then you have where that's blocked by either a point, topography, a dock, a jetty, anything where you have fast moving current and slow moving current. That creates an ambush point for those speckled trout. As far as water depth, speckled trout will be up in as shallow as 1 to 2 foot of water depth. We catch most of our speckled trout in anywhere 3 to 4, 5 feet of water depth is about the average area. Now, if it's deeper, speckled trout for speckled trout is going to be anything I would consider over 8 feet, especially in the summertime when you get really warm temperatures and that water temp starts getting into the 80s. You're going to be looking for those deeper areas that hold some of that cooler water. You're also going to be targeting speckled trout in the lower light areas, you know, sunrise and sunset. You know, again, speckled trout are heavily motivated by water temperature and water quality. Just some last little tidbits of where to locate speckled trout in the wintertime. Speckled trout in the mid-Atlantic fisheries they will either A, push out into the ocean, out into the bays and larger bodies of water, or other class of them will push back into creeks. So it's weird. It's like two different patterns. One class of speckled trout, a hefty population of speckled trout, will push out into the ocean and out into the bays, and that's where they'll spend the winter, where the water temperature is more consistent. Then the other class of speckled trout will push up into the creeks. So Wilmington, North Carolina is a great area, Morehead City, down to South Carolina, and everywhere really for that matter. Throughout the winter time, you're going to be targeting those speckled trout and those creeks that I like to target, those creeks that have deeper creeks with a darker muddy bottom. That darker muddy bottom is going to warm up quicker on that sunny day. It's going to hold more heat and deeper water where those trout can go to if you get a very cold night where it's going to freeze, and those trout are going to go to that deeper water to get to that, again, just more consistent and warmer water temperatures. That pretty much summarizes where to catch speckled trout and where to locate them. You do need to search them out. If y'all catch a speckled trout, then put down your anchor. Put it on anchor mode on your trolling motor. Be very quiet. Don't spook them, because there could be hundreds of speckled trout in that school. If you're catching them every single cast and then all of a sudden the bite just turns off, which happens a lot, then you just need to, maybe that school has moved. Maybe that school, trout are very finicky. So that bite will just be on fire for, it could be 30 minutes to an hour or 2 hours for that matter, a whole tide cycle. And then all of a sudden they'll just shut off. And that's just how it goes. That's speckled trout fishing. So what do? You either try and keep up with that school and locate them as that school moves down the bank, or you go find another school. So it's a fish that you do need to do a lot of searching out for. Again, if you're catching those 12 to 17 inch speckled trout and you really want to catch that giant speckled trout, that gator speckled trout, 25, 30 incher, then, those are going to be more solitary fish. That 30 inch trout is not going to be hanging out with those 12 inch trout, because that 30 inch trout is eating those 12 inch trout. So hopefully that helps y'all of where you can locate speckled trout. That right there is how you catch speckled trout. Thank y'all for watching, and go out, catch yourself a big old gator speckled trout.